It began, as it often does, with a quiet announcement, a few sentences tucked into a diocesan bulletin, no public debate, no press conference, no heartfelt explanation, just a statement, and with it, a tradition that had stood firm for decades was swept aside in an instant. A bishop had made his decision, and the faithful, they were expected to bow their heads, gather their things, and leave. But that's not what happened. Because when something sacred is taken away, when a spiritual lifeline is quietly cut, the soul doesn't walk away in silence. It kneels, it weeps, it prays. And in one French city, that's exactly what the faithful did. In the Diocese of Veilance, a city nestled in the Drôme region of southeastern France, a decades-old community built on the reverence and beauty of the traditional Latin Mass was officially told they would be no more. As of September 1st, their ministry, their sacraments, their catechism, their spiritual home, all of it would be shut down. The bishop, Franz Durand, made the decision quietly but decisively. The Fraternity of St. Peter, or FSSB as they are known, would no longer have permission to operate in the diocese. No more Mass, no more confession, no more catechism for the children, no more baptisms, weddings, or funerals celebrated in the ancient rite. All pastoral activity was to cease. The official reason? A lack of pastoral unity. Those were the words written on the diocesan website. Just 3 words. But they carried the weight of judgment, the finality of a gavel. Yet beneath that polished phrase lies a tension that has been growing quietly for years. At the heart of the bishop's decision was one moment, one liturgical choice, one act of conscience. The priests of the Fraternity of St. Peter had chosen not to celebrate the Chrism Mass with the bishop during Holy Week. It's a Mass intended to show unity among diocesan clergy, a beautiful tradition, yes, but not a mandatory one. In fact, church law is crystal clear. No priest is ever obligated to celebrate Mass. Canon 902 states this without ambiguity, and the Vatican's own departments, both the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts, have confirmed it multiple times. Celebration is always voluntary. Still, in Veilance, this lawful decision was treated as rebellion, as disobedience, as grounds for removal. But the faithful knew the truth. This wasn't about disobedience. This was about tradition, and they were not going to abandon it quietly. For over 3 decades, the FSSB had served the people of Veilance with tireless devotion. They offered daily Mass using the 1962 Missal, administered the sacraments, held regular confession, conducted Eucharistic adoration, and offered weekly catechism classes grounded in the doctrine of the saints, especially St. Pius X. Families found spiritual stability in this apostolate. Children learned their faith with reverence. Young couples got married in the ancient rite. Baptisms, confirmations, funerals, all were celebrated with sacred dignity. In an era where many parishes struggled to stay open, this community was growing. And then, overnight, it was gone. At least, that's what the bishop expected. But what he didn't expect was what followed. When the announcement went live in early July, the faithful didn't take to social media in outrage. They didn't storm the chancery or stage a protest. They went to church. Within hours of the decision, they began gathering at Notre Dame Church, the home of their spiritual life. They came with tears. They came with rosaries. They came with a determination rooted not in anger, but in love. Mothers with babies on their backs, elderly couples leaning on each other for balance, teenagers holding candles, fathers with tired eyes and worn-out Bibles. They came, and they stayed. They began holding vigils, night after night. They remained in prayer, in adoration, offering their heartbreak to Christ in the tabernacle. They organized shifts to ensure someone was always present, even in the dead of night. They weren't protesting. They were worshipping. They fasted, not for headlines, not to draw attention, but as a spiritual offering. Every hunger pain was turned into prayer. Every skipped meal a cry of the heart to heaven. Even children joined the effort. Small hands gripped rosary beads as they sat quietly beside their parents, unaware of the full implications, yet sensing the weight of something sacred being threatened. And then they signed. More than 400 parishioners came together to compose a respectful, heartfelt letter addressed to Bishop Durand. It wasn't political, it wasn't angry. It was a plea, a sincere request for reconsideration. They asked him to look at their lives, to see their families, to recognize the fruit of faith that had grown for over 30 years under the FSSB care. They weren't fighting, they were begging to be allowed to remain Catholic in the way they had always known, but the bishop did not respond, and yet they stayed. Some pitched tents in the church parking lot, unwilling to let the heartbeat of their community fade without resistance. Others kept vigil in silence, hour after hour, whispering prayers in Latin and English and French. Gregorian chants filled the cold night air. The smell of incense still lingered on the altar linens. Though Mass could no longer be offered publicly, the church itself had become a living prayer, its very stones soaked in tears, faith, and reverence. These were not fanatics. These were not rebels. These were faithful Catholics holding on to the treasures passed down through generations, and in their quiet resistance, they became a witness, not just to their city or their bishop, but to the whole church. Because Veilance is not alone. Across the world, faithful communities like this one are being quietly silenced. Latin Mass communities, reverent parishes, traditional orders, all are slowly being stripped away, often with vague phrases like pastoral unity or greater inclusion used to justify their removal. But the silence from Rome has become deafening. Since Pope Francis issued Traditionis Custodes in 2021, a document that gave local bishops the power to restrict the traditional Latin Mass, dozens of thriving communities have been shut down. And while some bishops have used that authority with pastoral care, others, like in Veilance, have used it as a weapon. Yet the FSSB is different. Unlike diocesan priests, the Fraternity of St. Peter operates under what's called pontifical right. That means they answer directly to the Pope, not the local bishop. And in February 2022, Pope Francis himself wrote a personal letter confirming that the FSSB had full permission to continue using the old rites. That letter was published on their website and offered hope to traditional communities around the world. But it was never officially recorded in the Vatican's legal bulletin. It had no formal decree attached, and so bishops like Durand were free to interpret it however they wished. And Rome stayed silent. So now we arrive here, in Veilance, where families kneel in parking lots, where catechism books sit unopened, where the altar is quiet, and the only sound is the whisper of the rosary echoing across the stone walls. They are not asking for privilege, not demanding control. They are simply asking to keep their faith alive in the form that nourished their grandparents, their saints, and their own hearts, and they are willing to suffer for it. If you look closely, the story unfolding in Veilance is not one of rebellion, it is one of reverence. It's not the kind of story that will make headlines. There are no loud voices, no cameras flashing, no dramatic statements from church officials, just the quiet hum of prayer in a place once filled with joy and now cloaked in sadness. And yet the heartbeat of the church is still there. You can hear it if you listen closely, because the people have not left. They keep showing up to a church that no longer offers Mass. They keep walking through doors that echo with absence. They keep kneeling before a tabernacle, even if the sacraments have stopped, because they believe Christ is still there, still watching, still listening. And when you ask them why they stay, they won't give you a political answer. They won't quote canon law, even though canon law supports them. They'll say something simple, something unshakable. Because this is our home. Because this is where heaven touched the earth. Because this is where our children met God. This isn't just about ritual, it's about inheritance. For generations, the Latin Mass has shaped the hearts and souls of Catholics around the world. The words, the rhythm, the incense, the silence. It's not about nostalgia, it's about transcendence. It's about giving God the best. It's about kneeling before a mystery, not just attending a gathering. In Veilance, this tradition has been alive for more than 30 years. A generation has grown up within its sacred structure. Young people who once served as altar boys are now fathers bringing their own sons. Daughters who once wore white veils at their first communion now bring their children to catechism class. And it wasn't just the Mass that shaped them. It was the confessions offered daily. It was the Eucharistic adoration that stretched deep into the night. It was the sermons, filled with clarity, truth, and courage. It was the friendships born around faith, not fashion, not trend, but truth. This was not a museum of the past. This was a living church until it was shut down. The reasoning? The refusal to celebrate the Chrism Mass during Holy Week. Let's pause for a moment and truly understand that. The Chrism Mass is a beautiful liturgy, yes. It's where the bishop blesses the holy oils used throughout the year, oil of catechumens, oil of the sick, and sacred chrism. Priests gather from around the diocese as a sign of unity, but in the Church's own law, Canon 902, no priest is ever required to celebrate. Not at the Chrism Mass, not at any Mass. And this is not just a footnote in a textbook. This is something the Vatican has confirmed time and time again. The decision to celebrate or not is a matter of personal conscience, theological conviction, and liturgical preference. No bishop has the right to force it. Not even the Pope can mandate it. And yet in Veilance, this voluntary choice was used as a reason to sever an entire community's lifeline. How can that be? What's more, the Fraternity of St. Peter, the priests at the center of this story, have a unique canonical structure. They are not diocesan priests. They are a society of apostolic life under pontifical right. That means they answer directly to the Holy See, not to the local bishop. And in February 2022, they received a personal letter from Pope Francis himself, affirming that they could continue celebrating the sacraments according to the liturgical books of 1962, without restrictions. The Pope's signature is on that letter. It was published publicly, and yet it has never been added to the official Vatican legal records. No formal decree was attached, no juridical weight was clarified, and so many bishops, like Bishop Durand, treat it as a polite gesture, not a binding commitment. So what happens? The FSSB remains canonically intact, but their functioning is suffocated. It's a kind of spiritual exile. The priests are not suspended. They are not accused of heresy. They are not being disciplined for misconduct or immorality. They are simply being excluded, silently, strategically, without recourse. No clear accusations, no public dialogue, no formal decrees. Just an email, a bulletin, a private meeting followed by an erasure. And what happens to the faithful? They lose everything. Their parish, their Mass, their community, their rhythm of grace. And still they kneel, still they fast, still they light candles and whisper decades of the rosary through tired lips. Because when something is truly sacred, you don't give it up easily. They don't want to start a new church. They don't want to rebel. They want to remain Catholic, as they always have, within the church they love. And that is what makes this moment so painful. It's not the suffering of exile, it's the suffering of being unwanted by your own family. Some have asked, why don't they just go somewhere else? As if the sacred is interchangeable, as if liturgy is like choosing a playlist or picking a coffee shop. But these families aren't clinging to a preference. They are holding onto a sacred inheritance, one the church once told them was good, beautiful, true. And now that inheritance is being quietly labeled divisive, rigid, unwelcomed. And they are being asked, told to walk away. But they don't. They remain quiet, faithful, unshaken. In fact, their very stillness has become a prophetic voice. As days turned into weeks, the movement in Veilance only deepened. It was no longer a reaction to injustice. It had become something else entirely. A living prayer. Some came just to sit in the pews. Others sat outside, rain dripping off their umbrellas, hands clasped in silence. A woman brought flowers every morning at 6 a.m. A young boy knelt for an hour, eyes closed, lips moving. One elderly man brought his old missal, even though Mass would not be said. He opened it, as if to remember, as if to say, I still believe this is ours. There are no microphones. There are no news crews. Only the saints know what's happening here, and perhaps that's enough. Because the saints are the ones who once knelt on similar stone floors. They are the ones who suffered for the same mass. They are the ones who once held the same missals. They are the ones who know exactly what it means to love the church even when the church seems to forget you. And in Veilance, that's what the people are doing. They're not angry. They're heartbroken. But their heartbreak has become their offering. Their silence has become their resistance. Their fasting has become their voice. And their presence, their sheer refusal to walk away, has become their hymn. What's happening in Veilance is not isolated. It's not a fluke or a one-time misunderstanding. It's part of a much larger pattern quietly spreading through the life of the church. A pattern where tradition, once cherished, is now treated like a threat. Where silence from Rome gives silent permission for others to act. Where bishops remove faithful priests for simply doing what the church once asked them to do, where reverent communities, families, children, vocations are disbanded not for disobedience, but for devotion. In some dioceses, it's done with a smile, in others, with cold efficiency. But the effect is the same, the slow, steady marginalization of Catholics who love what the Church used to teach, what the saints used to pray, what the Church itself once canonized. And in this growing pattern, the silence from the top is not neutral, it is deafening. When Pope Leo Roman XIV was elected, many faithful Catholics hoped for clarity, for a reset, for healing. They hoped he would speak to both sides, not to create division, but to offer balance, to show that the Church is wide enough to hold both the new and the old, that there is room in the Father's house for the Son who never left as well as the one returning home. But so far there has been no word, no guidance, no encouragement, no public acknowledgement of what has been unfolding. And so bishops who remove traditional priests, even in violation of papal permissions, go unchecked. They act confidently. They act boldly. They know there will be no letter from Rome, no call asking them to reconsider. No rebuke for scattering the flock, and so the pattern continues. Meanwhile, the faithful suffer not with fury, but with fidelity. They suffer silently. They suffer sacrificially. They suffer with love, because what is happening in Veilance, and in cities like it around the world, is not just a bureaucratic decision. It is a spiritual crucifixion, the slow removal of the sacred. The quiet displacement of those who seek reverence, the fading of incense, the silence of chant, the stripping of altars, not just physically, but spiritually. And yet, in that suffering, something extraordinary happens. They don't leave. They don't run. They remain. They kneel in empty churches. They pray before closed tabernacles. They offer up their tears and make them part of the liturgy that has been taken from them. They become, in their bodies, what the church is in this moment: bruised, quiet, faithful. And there, in that silence, something begins to grow. Not rebellion, not resentment, but resurrection. Because the truth is, the Latin Mass cannot be erased, not because it's written in law, not because it has vocal defenders, but because it has been etched into the hearts of saints. It has shaped martyrs. It has inspired conversions. It has raised up entire civilizations. And you cannot remove what heaven has already embraced. You can close a parish. You can silence a priest. You can issue a decree, but you cannot erase what God has written on the soul of his church. And in Veilance, that's what we are seeing. Not a death, but a witness. They don't wave flags. They don't chant slogans. They don't shout into microphones. They just kneel, and their kneeling is louder than thunder, because it says, we're still here, we still believe, we still love this church, even if it does not love us back right now. And that is the scandal and the miracle of what's happening now, that these people, treated as outsiders, still choose fidelity. That these families, stripped of everything, still remain near the sacraments, even when the sacraments are taken from them. That these priests, exiled and unwanted, still pray for the bishops who exiled them. This is not normal. This is not political. This is not performative. This is holy. And if the church hierarchy refuses to see it, heaven surely does, because heaven has always seen the forgotten, heard the silent, honored the obedient. What do you do when your own family rejects you? You stay. You love anyway. You hold the line. You weep, yes. You fast. You offer. But you don't abandon your post. That's what it means to be Catholic. To believe that truth is not dependent on popularity. That beauty doesn't require permission. That reverence is never outdated. And so, to the faithful in Veilance, you are not forgotten. Your prayers are not wasted. Your presence is not pointless. You are the living witness of what it means to endure, not with bitterness, but with grace. You are the psalms being sung in the wilderness. You are the incense rising through the silence. You are the tabernacle that cannot be locked. And to those watching from afar, what about you? Does this stir something in you? Do you recognize yourself in this story? Have you ever felt displaced in the very place meant to be your home? Have you been told that your reverence is divisive? That your devotion is too much? That your love for tradition makes you rigid or extreme? Then maybe, just maybe, Veilance is not far from you at all. Maybe it's already inside your own heart. Maybe your parish hasn't been shut down. But maybe your spirit has been discouraged, and if that's the case, then kneel with them, fast with them, pray with them, light a candle in your room and whisper a decade of the rosary for those who now kneel in the cold. Because this isn't just about France. This is about the soul of the Church, about whether there's still room for reverence, still space for silence, still honor for tradition, and maybe, just maybe, when the history of this time is written, it won't be the bishops or the canon lawyers who are remembered. It will be the faithful, the families who stayed, the children who prayed, the priests who obeyed their conscience, the laypeople who gave up comfort for fidelity, those who sat in pews long after the lights were turned off, those who chose faith over fear, tradition over trend, truth over convenience, those who said nothing and yet proclaimed everything. So if you've made it this far in the video, this is your invitation. Comment Amen below if your heart echoes with theirs. Pray for your local parish, your bishop, your priest. Pray for Bishop Durand. Pray for Pope Leo Roman XIV. Pray that the Church may remember who she is. Because tradition is not a style, it is a flame passed hand to hand, soul to soul, through centuries of saints. And it still burns, in Veilance, in silence, in the hearts of the faithful, and now maybe in yours.